The day Rebecca Zimmerman asked Elder Daniels why God would condemn good people who had never heard the gospel, the congregation turned on her like wolves, circling wounded prey. She stood in the center of the small wooden church in Steins Pass, New Mexico, her hands trembling as 24 faces stared at her with expressions ranging from shock to disgust, and she realized in that moment that her entire life was about to collapse around her like a poorly built fence in a windstorm. You dare question the Lord's wisdom? Elder Daniels boomed from the pulpit, his face turning the color of sun-baked clay. The year was 1881, and in this isolated mining town, tucked between the Pelanchilo Mountains and the harsh desert landscape, questioning faith was tantamount to blasphemy. Rebecca had lived her entire 22 years in Steins Pass, born to parents who had come west seeking gold and found God instead, raising their daughter in the strict fundamentalist community that had formed around the railroad station and precious water wells. I am not questioning God, Rebecca said, trying to keep her voice steady, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. I am trying to understand his nature. If he is truly loving and just, then how can he punish people for not knowing something they never had the chance to learn? Her mother gasped from the third pew, covering her mouth with her hand. Her father stood abruptly, his weathered face twisted with shame and anger. Around the small church, whispers spread like wildfire through dry grass. Get out, Elder Daniels said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet that somehow carried more weight than his shouting. Get out of this house of worship. You bring corruption and doubt to these good people. Rebecca felt her throat tighten. Please, I am only asking questions. Is that not how we grow in faith? Faith requires no questions, the elder declared. Faith requires obedience and acceptance. You have neither. Leave now or we will remove you by force. Rebecca looked to her parents, hoping for some sign of support, some indication that they would defend their only daughter. Her mother was weeping silently, her face turned away. Her father would not meet her eyes. Around the room, people she had known her entire life, people she had shared meals with, celebrated holidays with, mourned losses with, all stared at her with cold rejection. She walked out of that church with her head held high, though tears streamed down her face. Behind her, someone slammed the door so hard it rattled the simple glass windows. She stood in the bright New Mexico sun, the heat already oppressive though it was barely 9 in the morning, and realized she had nowhere to go. By midday, her parents had packed her belongings into 2 small bags and left them on the front porch of their adobe home. When she tried the door, she found it barred from inside. Her mother would not even come to the window to look at her. Please, Rebecca called through the door. I am your daughter. Where am I supposed to go? You should have thought of that before you shamed us. Her father's voice came back, muffled and hard. We have no daughter who turns her back on God. I have not turned my back on anything, Rebecca protested, but there was no response. She stood there for nearly an hour, hoping they would relent, hoping this was some cruel lesson that would end with forgiveness and reconciliation. But the door remained closed, and eventually she picked up her bags and walked away from the only home she had ever known. Steins Pass was not a large town. It existed primarily because of the railroad that cut through the desert and the stage station that provided a stopping point between larger settlements. There was a general store, a saloon, a boarding house, a small hotel for travelers, and the church. Perhaps 200 people called it home, and by sunset, every single one of them knew that Rebecca Zimmerman had been cast out for heresy. She tried the boarding house first. Mrs. Patterson, who had always seemed kind, who had praised Rebecca's needlework and her way with children, took one look at her standing on the porch and shook her head. I cannot harbor someone who has been cast out by the church, she said, her voice apologetic but firm. It would not be right. I am sorry, Rebecca, but you must go somewhere else. The hotel manager would not even open the door to speak with her. The general store owner refused to sell her supplies. By the time darkness fell over the desert, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Rebecca found herself sitting on the edge of town near the water tower, her bags beside her, with nowhere to sleep and no plan for survival. She was not naive enough to think she could survive in the desert without preparation. The landscape around Stein's Pass was unforgiving, beautiful in its stark way, but deadly to those who did not respect its dangers. Summer temperatures could exceed 100 degrees. Water was scarce. There were rattlesnakes, scorpions, and other creatures that could kill an unprepared person. She had no horse, limited supplies, and no idea where she could go that would take her in. For the first time since leaving the church that morning, Rebecca allowed herself to truly cry. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed, her shoulders shaking with the force of her grief and fear. She had only asked questions. She had only wanted to understand. How had that led to this complete destruction of her life? "Miss, are you all right?" The voice startled her so badly she nearly fell off the edge of the water tower platform. She looked up to find a man standing a respectful distance away, silhouetted against the darkening sky. He was tall, lean in the way of men who spent their lives working hard, and wore the dusty clothes of a cowboy, hat in his hands. "I am fine," Rebecca said automatically, wiping at her face and trying to compose herself. "Please do not trouble yourself." "Well, that is clearly not true," the man said, his voice gentle. "A woman sitting alone in the dark, crying with packed bags beside her, that speaks of some kind of trouble. I am Lucas Brennan. I work the cattle ranch about 10 miles south of here. Are you waiting for the stage?" "No," Rebecca said, then found she did not know what else to say. What could she tell this stranger? That she had been cast out by everyone she knew for the crime of curiosity. Lucas Brennan moved a bit closer, and in the fading light, Rebecca could make out more details. He had a kind face, weathered by sun and wind, with clear blue eyes that looked genuinely concerned. He appeared to be perhaps 25 or 26, with sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the edges beneath his hat. "I do not mean to pry," he said, "but if you are in some kind of difficulty, maybe I could help. Are you trying to leave town? Do you need money for passage somewhere?" "I have money," Rebecca said, though it was not much. She had her small savings from years of doing laundry and mending for other families in town. "I just have nowhere to go." Lucas frowned, then glanced back toward the main part of town. "You are from Stein's Pass, are you not? I have seen you at the general store before. I recognize you." Rebecca nodded. "I was from here, but I am not welcome anymore." "What happened?" Lucas asked, then quickly added, "You do not have to tell me if you do not want to. I am just trying to understand how I might help." Something about his honest concern, or perhaps just the emotional exhaustion of the terrible day, made Rebecca tell him everything. She explained about the church service, about her question, about Elder Daniels casting her out and her parents refusing to shelter her. She told him about how every door in town had closed to her, how she had nowhere to sleep and no prospects for her future. Lucas listened to all of it without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly troubled. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the desert. "That is terrible," he finally said. "That is cruel and terrible, and I am sorry it happened to you. For what it is worth, I think asking questions is one of the most important things a person can do. How else do we learn? How else do we grow?" Rebecca stared at him in surprise. "You do not think questioning faith is wrong?" "I think blind faith without understanding is not really faith at all," Lucas said. "It is just obedience born from fear. My mother used to say that God gave us minds to use them, not to shut them off whenever something seemed difficult or confusing. She was a school teacher back in Kansas before she married my father. She always encouraged questions about everything." "Where is she now?" Rebecca asked. "Dead these 5 years," Lucas said quietly. "Cholera. My father, too. That is why I came west, to start fresh somewhere new. I have been working for the Copper Creek Ranch, Since 78. It is good work, good people. I am sorry for your loss, Rebecca said sincerely. Thank you. Lucas was quiet again for a moment, then seemed to come to some decision. Look, I cannot in good conscience leave you out here alone. The boss at the ranch, Mr. Henderson, he and his wife are decent people. They might have work for you, or at least a safe place to stay while you figure out what to do next. Would you be willing to come out there? I promise you will be safe. Mrs. Henderson runs a tight ship, and she would not tolerate anyone treating you poorly. Rebecca wanted to accept immediately, but caution held her back. You do not know me. Why would you help me? Because you need help, and I am in a position to offer it, Lucas said simply. And because I think what happened to you today was wrong. People should not be punished for thinking, for asking questions, for trying to understand the world better. If that makes me a heretic too, well, so be it. His words, his easy acceptance of her situation, his willingness to help without judgment, all of it made something tight in Rebecca's chest begin to loosen. She was not wrong. She was not evil. She had not deserved what happened to her today. I would be very grateful, she said softly. Thank you. Lucas smiled, and it transformed his entire face. Good. I have my horse over by the saloon. It is about an hour's ride to the ranch. Are you comfortable riding? I can manage, Rebecca said, though she had only ridden a handful of times in her life. Horses were expensive, and her family had never owned one. Lucas collected her bags and his horse, a sturdy bay gelding with a patient temperament. He secured her belongings behind the saddle, then helped her mount before swinging up behind her. Rebecca tried not to think about how close he was, how she could feel the warmth of his body at her back and the strength of his arms reaching around her to hold the reins. They rode out of Stein's Pass as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear in the vast darkness above. The desert at night was a different world entirely, cooler, but still holding the day's heat in the sand and rocks. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and Rebecca shivered slightly. You are safe, Lucas said quietly near her ear. I promise. And somehow, despite everything that had happened, despite having her entire life torn apart in a single day, Rebecca believed him. The Copper Creek Ranch was larger than Rebecca had expected, a sprawling operation that ran several hundred head of cattle across grazing land that stretched from the base of the mountains out into the desert valleys. The main house was a solid adobe structure with a wide porch and actual glass windows, speaking to the success of the operation. There were several outbuildings, a large barn, corrals, and a bunkhouse for the ranch hands. Lucas helped Rebecca down from the horse and tied the animal to the porch rail. Wait here just a moment. Let me speak to Mrs. Henderson first. He disappeared into the house, and Rebecca stood in the darkness, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look after the long, terrible day. She tried to smooth her hair and brush the worst of the dust from her dress, but there was only so much she could do. The door opened, spilling warm light onto the porch, and a woman emerged, followed by Lucas. Mrs. Henderson was in her mid-40s, with graying brown hair pulled back in a practical bun and sharp, intelligent eyes that assessed Rebecca quickly. Lucas tells me you have had quite a day, she said, her voice crisp but not unkind. Come inside. You look dead on your feet. The interior of the house was comfortable and clean, with well-made furniture and rugs on the floor. Mrs. Henderson led Rebecca to the kitchen, where she poured her a cup of water from a ceramic pitcher and gestured for her to sit at the large wooden table. Now then, Mrs. Henderson said, sitting across from her while Lucas leaned against the doorframe. Lucas has explained your situation, but I would like to hear it from you. What exactly happened today? Rebecca went through the story again, though more briefly this time. Mrs. Henderson listened with a neutral expression, her hands folded on the table in front of her. And this question you asked, Mrs. Henderson said when Rebecca finished, about God condemning good people who never heard the gospel. What made you think of that? There was a traveler who came through town last month, Rebecca said. He had been to China and told stories about the people there, their beliefs, their lives. He said they were good people, kind, and moral, but they had never heard of Jesus. And I started thinking about what happens to their souls, and I could not reconcile a loving God with eternal punishment for something that was not their fault. So I asked. Mrs. Henderson nodded slowly. That seems like a reasonable question to me. My late father was a minister, and he believed that God was far more merciful and complex than most preachers gave him credit for. He would have enjoyed discussing that question with you, I think. Rebecca felt tears prick at her eyes again. You do not think I was wrong to ask. I think you were brave to ask, Mrs. Henderson said firmly. And I think Elder Daniels is a small-minded tyrant who uses religion to control people rather than to enlighten them. But that is neither here nor there. The question is what we do now. She paused, studying Rebecca carefully. Can you cook? Yes, madam. I can cook, clean, sew, do laundry, tend a garden, and keep accounts. My mother made sure I learned all the household skills. Can you read and write? Yes, madam. My mother taught me before the church decided that too much education for women was dangerous. Mrs. Henderson's mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. Of course they did. Well, Miss Zimmerman, it so happens that I could use some help around here. My husband and I are not as young as we used to be, and managing this household along with the ranch bookkeeping has become more than I can handle comfortably. I can offer you room and board and a small wage in exchange for helping with cooking, cleaning, and general household management. Does that sound acceptable? More than acceptable, Rebecca said, relief flooding through her. Thank you. Thank you so much. Do not thank me yet, Mrs. Henderson said dryly. I am a demanding employer, and there is a lot of work to do. But you will be treated fairly, and no one here will punish you for having a functioning mind. Now you look exhausted. Let me show you to your room, and we can discuss details in the morning. The room Mrs. Henderson showed her to was small but clean, with a real bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out toward the dark mountains. It was more than Rebecca had dared hope for when she sat crying by the water tower just a few hours earlier. After Mrs. Henderson left, Rebecca sat on the edge of the bed and let herself feel the full weight of everything that had happened. She had lost her family, her community, everything familiar and known. But she had also found something unexpected, people who did not punish questions, who valued thinking, who offered help without judgment. She thought about Lucas Brennan, about his kindness and his easy acceptance, about the way he had listened to her story without condemnation. She thought about his words about faith and questions and using the minds God gave them. For the first time since leaving the church that morning, Rebecca felt something other than fear and grief. She felt a small spark of hope. The next morning, Rebecca woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the sound of roosters crowing. For a moment, she was disoriented, expecting to see her familiar bedroom in her parents' house. Then memory returned, and with it a complex mixture of pain and relief. She dressed in her second dress, the one that had been in her packed bags, and made her way to the kitchen. Mrs. Henderson was already there, working on breakfast. "Good morning," the older woman said. "There is water for washing in the basin. Breakfast is nearly ready." Rebecca washed her face and hands, then asked, "What can I do to help?" "Set the table, please. Plates are in that cupboard. We will be 8 for breakfast. My husband, myself, you, and 5 ranch hands, including Lucas." Rebecca set the long table as directed, and soon men began filing in from the bunkhouse, drawn by the smell of coffee and frying bacon. They were weathered, sun-darkened men of various ages, all with the lean, strong build of people who worked hard for their living. They greeted Mrs. Henderson respectfully and eyed Rebecca with curiosity, but not hostility. Lucas was the last to arrive, his hair still damp from washing. He smiled at Rebecca. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" Better than I expected, Rebecca admitted. Mr. Henderson turned out to be a quiet man in his 50s with shrewd eyes and a weathered face. He nodded to Rebecca. My wife tells me you will be helping around the house. Welcome to Copper Creek Ranch. We run a decent operation here. Work hard, treat people fairly, and we will all get along fine. Yes, sir. Thank you for the opportunity. Breakfast was hearty and filling. Bacon, eggs, biscuits with gravy, and strong coffee. The men ate quickly, discussing the day's work. There were cattle to move to better grazing, fences to mend, and a problem with the windmill that needed attention. After breakfast, the men headed out to their various tasks, and Mrs. Henderson began instructing Rebecca in the household routine. There was much to do: dishes to wash, floors to sweep, bread to bake, laundry to manage, and a vegetable garden to tend. Mrs. Henderson also showed her the ranch ledgers, explaining how she tracked expenses and income. My husband handles the cattle side of things, Mrs. Henderson explained, but I manage everything else. It is essential to keep accurate records. Too many ranches fail because they do not know whether they are actually making money or just working themselves into debt. Rebecca found the bookkeeping fascinating. She had always been good with numbers, but there had been little opportunity to use that skill in her previous life. Here she could see how the ranch functioned as a business, how careful management of resources made the difference between success and failure. Over the following days, Rebecca settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She rose early to help with breakfast, spent her mornings cleaning and cooking, her afternoons in the garden or with the ledgers, and her evenings preparing dinner and doing mending. It was hard work, but satisfying in a way her previous life had never been. She felt useful, valued for her skills rather than judged for her thoughts. Lucas had duties that kept him busy from dawn until after dark most days. He worked with the cattle, rode the range checking for problems, mended fences, and helped with the dozens of tasks necessary to keep a ranch running. But he often managed to be around the main house during meals, and Rebecca found herself looking forward to those times. He was easy to talk to, with a quick sense of humor and genuine interest in other people's thoughts and experiences. More than that, he actually listened when she spoke, considering her words carefully before responding. After a lifetime of being told that her role was to be quiet and obedient, Lucas's respect for her opinions felt revolutionary. One evening, about 2 weeks after her arrival, Rebecca was in the garden pulling weeds when Lucas rode up on his bay gelding. He dismounted and led the horse to the water trough, then walked over to where she was working. Mind if I sit a moment? He asked. Not at all, Rebecca said, sitting back on her heels and pushing a strand of hair out of her face. Lucas lowered himself onto the ground nearby, removing his hat and wiping sweat from his forehead. Hot today. It is always hot, Rebecca said, with a slight smile. I do not think New Mexico knows any other temperature in summer. Truth, Lucas agreed. He was quiet for a moment, then said, I wanted to ask you something. How are you doing? Really, I mean. I know it has only been 2 weeks since everything happened. That is not much time to process losing your entire family and community. Rebecca appreciated that he did not try to sugarcoat what had happened. Some days are harder than others, she admitted. I keep expecting my mother to appear, or to wake up and find this was all a terrible dream. But then I remember the way she turned her face away from me, and I know it is real. They chose their community over their daughter. I am not sure I can forgive that. I do not know that you have to forgive it, Lucas said quietly. What they did was cruel. They abandoned you for asking a question, for wanting to understand. That is not love, no matter how they might justify it to themselves. The hardest part is wondering if I was wrong, Rebecca confessed. What if I was being prideful? What if I should have just accepted what I was told and not made trouble? Do you believe that? Lucas asked. Rebecca thought about it carefully. No, I do not. I do not think wanting to understand makes me prideful. I do not think God, if he is truly good and loving, would want us to turn off our minds and just obey without question. But it is hard to trust my own judgment when everyone I have known my entire life says I am wrong. Not everyone, Lucas pointed out. Mrs. Henderson does not think you are wrong. Mr. Henderson hired you without hesitation when his wife explained the situation. I certainly do not think you are wrong. We may not be the community you grew up with, but we are people who know you and think you did the right thing. His words warmed something inside Rebecca's chest. Thank you. That means more than you know. I mean it, Lucas said earnestly, leaning forward slightly. I have been thinking a lot about what you said about your question, and I think it is an important question. I was raised to believe in a loving God, but also one who supposedly condemns most of humanity to eternal torment for not following very specific rules that many people never even heard. That never sat right with me. What kind of love is that? What kind of justice? So what do you believe? Rebecca asked, genuinely curious. Lucas was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the desert landscape painted gold by the setting sun. I think God, if he exists, is far bigger and more mysterious than any human religion gives him credit for. I think trying to understand him through rigid rules and fear of punishment is like trying to understand the ocean by staring at a cup of water. You might learn something, but you are missing the vastness of it all. That is beautiful, Rebecca said softly. Or complete heresy, depending on who you ask, Lucas said with a wry smile. Which I suppose makes us a good pair of outcasts. Are you an outcast? Rebecca asked. I thought you said the Hendersons were good people. They are, but I do not go to church in town anymore. I stopped going about 6 months ago after Elder Daniels gave a sermon about how questioning God's will was the same as spitting in his face. I realized I did not want to spend my Sunday mornings being yelled at by a man who seemed more interested in control than in compassion. The other ranch hands think I am strange for it, but they leave me alone mostly. It must have been difficult, giving up your community like that. Lucas shrugged. It was not much of a loss, honestly. I never felt like I truly belonged there anyway. Too many questions, as Elder Daniels would say. He grinned suddenly. Apparently, I have a fatal flaw of wanting things to make sense. Rebecca found herself smiling back. What a terrible affliction. The worst, Lucas agreed. Completely incurable, I am afraid. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun sink lower toward the horizon. Rebecca felt something shifting inside her, some of the grief and confusion of the past weeks settling into a new shape. She had lost much, but perhaps she was also finding something new, a place where she could be herself, where questions were welcomed rather than condemned, where people valued thinking over blind obedience. And perhaps, though she was not quite ready to examine the thought too closely, she was finding something else as well, a connection with someone who understood her in a way no one else ever had. As summer deepened and July turned toward August, Rebecca's life at the ranch became familiar and comfortable. She and Mrs. Henderson developed an efficient working relationship, dividing the household tasks in a way that played to each woman's strengths. Rebecca discovered she had a talent for the bookkeeping that Mrs. Henderson found tedious, while the older woman was far better at managing the large-scale cooking for the ranch hands. More importantly, Rebecca found herself thinking less about what she had lost and more about what she was building. She liked the work, the sense of accomplishment at the end of a long day, the satisfaction of seeing tangible results from her efforts. She liked the Hendersons, who treated her fairly and with respect. She liked the ranch itself, the wide open spaces and the dramatic landscape that was so different from the cramped confines of town life. And she liked Lucas Brennan, though she tried not to think too much about exactly how much she liked him. It was impossible not to notice him, though. He was unfailingly kind, always ready with a smile or a word of encouragement when she seemed overwhelmed. He helped her with heavy tasks without being asked, fixed things that broke before she even knew they needed fixing, and somehow always appeared when she needed someone to talk to. More than that, He continued to seek her out for conversations that ranged far beyond polite pleasantries. They talked about faith and philosophy, about the nature of morality and justice, about the world beyond the desert, and what might lie in the future for the country. Lucas had an inquiring mind that delighted in exploring ideas from all angles, never settling for easy answers. "What do you think happens after we die?" he asked her one evening as they sat on the porch after dinner, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I do not know," Rebecca admitted. "I was taught that believers go to heaven and everyone else goes to hell, but that never made sense to me. What about small children who die before they can understand faith? What about people who live good lives but never encounter Christianity? The whole system seems flawed." "Maybe there is not a system," Lucas suggested. "Maybe death is just another mystery, something we cannot understand while we are alive, and trying to create rigid rules about it is pointless." "But if there is no heaven or hell, what is the point of being good?" Rebecca asked. "I am not saying I believe that. I am just curious what you think. Why does there need to be a cosmic reward system for goodness to have a point?" Lucas countered. "Is not making life better for the people around you, reducing suffering, creating moments of joy, is that not enough of a point on its own?" Rebecca considered this. "I suppose it should be, but I was raised to think of morality in terms of divine commands and eternal consequences. It is hard to shift to thinking of it as just, what, being a decent person because that is the right thing to do." "Why is that hard?" Lucas asked. "Does not it actually make being good more meaningful if you are doing it because you genuinely believe it is right, not because you are afraid of punishment or hoping for reward?" "I suppose it does," Rebecca said slowly. She found herself smiling. "You are very good at making me reconsider things I thought I understood." "You do the same for me," Lucas said, and there was something in his voice that made Rebecca look at him more closely. In the dim light from the windows, she could see him watching her with an expression that made her heart beat faster. "Do I?" she asked softly. "You do," he confirmed. "You have a way of seeing right to the heart of things, of asking the questions that matter. I have never met anyone quite like you, Rebecca." The way he said her name, with such warmth and something else she could not quite define, made Rebecca's breath catch. The air between them seemed charged with possibility, and for a moment she thought he might reach for her hand. But then Mr. Henderson came out onto the porch, and the moment passed. Lucas stood, making some excuse about checking on his horse, and disappeared into the darkness. Rebecca sat for a while longer, her heart still racing, wondering what might have happened if they had not been interrupted. The next day, Mrs. Henderson asked Rebecca to ride into Lordsburg, a larger town about 15 miles west, to pick up supplies that could not be obtained in Stein's Pass. It was a trip that required an overnight stay, and Mrs. Henderson arranged for Rebecca to stay with friends who ran a boarding house there. "Take Lucas with you," Mrs. Henderson said. "It is not safe for a woman to travel alone, and he knows the route well. You can take the wagon and load up on the supplies we need." Rebecca agreed, trying to ignore the flutter of nerves in her stomach at the prospect of spending 2 days in Lucas's company. They set out early the next morning, the wagon rattling along the dusty road that cut through the desert landscape. The July heat was already oppressive, and Rebecca was grateful for the bonnet that shaded her face. "Have you been to Lordsburg before?" Lucas asked as he handled the reins. "Once when I was a child. I do not remember much about it except that it seemed very large and busy compared to Stein's Pass." "It has grown since then," Lucas said. "It is a railroad town, so there is more commerce, more people passing through. More diverse, too. You will see people from all over the world there." "That sounds wonderful," Rebecca said sincerely. After the isolation and homogeneity of Stein's Pass, the idea of encountering people from different places and backgrounds appealed to her. They talked as they traveled, the conversation flowing easily between them as it always did. Lucas told her about growing up in Kansas, about his parents and the small farm they had worked, about the devastation when the cholera epidemic had swept through his community. I was 21, Baya, he said quietly, old enough to be on my own, but not ready to lose them both within 3 days of each other. My mother got sick first. My father tended to her, and then he got sick too. They died within hours of each other. After we buried them, I could not stay there anymore. Everything reminded me of them. So I sold the farm, packed what I could carry, and came west. I am so sorry, Rebecca said, touching his arm gently. That must have been terrible. It was the worst thing I have ever experienced, Lucas admitted. For a long time, I was angry. Angry at God, angry at the world, angry at myself for not being able to save them. But eventually, I realized that anger was just another kind of cage. I could either spend my life raging at the unfairness of it all, or I could try to live in a way that would have made them proud. They were good people, kind and generous and curious about everything. My mother especially believed in always learning, always questioning, always growing. So I try to honor that. I think they would be very proud of the man you are, Rebecca said softly. Lucas glanced at her, and something in his expression made her heart skip. That means a lot coming from you. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat the lunch Mrs. Henderson had packed for them. They found a spot with some shade from a cluster of mesquite trees and sat on a blanket, sharing cold chicken and biscuits. Can I ask you something personal? Lucas said after a while. Of course. Do you miss it at all? Your old life, your family, the church? Rebecca thought about the question carefully. I miss my mother, or rather, I miss who I thought my mother was. I miss the idea of having parents who loved me unconditionally. But the reality is that their love was conditional on my obedience, my willingness to conform. So do I miss that? No. It hurts that they rejected me, but I do not miss living in a cage of fear and enforced ignorance. That is a very honest answer, Lucas said. You asked an honest question, Rebecca replied. Can I ask you something? Anything. Why did you help me that night? You did not know me. You could have just ridden past. Lucas was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the shimmering heat waves rising from the desert. When I was at my lowest, right after my parents died, a stranger helped me. I was drunk in a saloon in Dodge City, trying to drown my grief, and I got into a fight with some other men. I would have been killed, probably, but this man intervened. He was older, a doctor, and he took me back to his office, patched me up, and talked to me for hours about grief and loss, and how to keep living when you wanted to die. He did not have to do any of that. I was just some stranger making stupid choices, but he helped me anyway, and it changed my life. So when I saw you sitting there alone and crying, I could not just ride past. Maybe I could be for you what that doctor was for me. Rebecca felt tears prick at her eyes. You have been so much more than that, Lucas. You have been a true friend, and I do not know what I would have done without you. You would have managed, Lucas said confidently. You are stronger than you give yourself credit for. But I am glad I could help. And I am glad you are at the ranch. It is better with you there. The simple honesty of his words touched something deep in Rebecca's heart. She found herself looking at him in a new way, seeing not just the kind cowboy who had helped her, but a man she genuinely cared about, whose presence made her days brighter, whose thoughts and opinions mattered to her in a way no one else has ever had. It is better for me too, she said softly. Much better. Their eyes met, and Rebecca saw in Lucas's gaze a reflection of what she was feeling. Affection, attraction, the beginnings of something deeper and more profound. He leaned slightly toward her, and she found herself leaning toward him in response, drawn by a force she did not fully understand but did not want to resist. His hand came up to cup her cheek gently, his thumb brushing across her skin in a touch that sent shivers down her spine despite the heat. Rebecca, he said quietly, I know this might not be the right time, and you can tell me if I am completely wrong, but I need you to know that you have become very important to me. More than just a friend, I think about you constantly. You are the first thing on my mind when I wake up, and the last thing I think about before I sleep. And if there is any chance that you might feel even a fraction of what I feel, I would very much like to court you properly." Rebecca's heart felt like it might burst from her chest. "Lucas," she breathed, covering his hand with hers, "I do feel the same way. I have been trying not to, because everything is so new and complicated, but I cannot help it. You make me happy in a way I have never been before. You make me feel like myself, like I do not have to hide or pretend or apologize for who I am." Lucas's face broke into a brilliant smile. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," Rebecca whispered. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, but she did not want to. When his lips met hers, gentle and sweet, Rebecca felt like everything in her life suddenly made sense. All the pain and loss and confusion of the past weeks led to this moment, to this man, to the possibility of a future she had never dared imagine. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing a bit unsteadily, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "I will do this right," he promised. "I will speak to Mr. Henderson when we get back, ask his permission to court you formally. I will take you to dances and picnics and anywhere else you want to go. I will show everyone that you are precious and valued and important." "You already do that," Rebecca said, blinking back happy tears. "Every single day." They arrived in Lordsburg by late afternoon and spent the evening gathering the supplies Mrs. Henderson had requested. Rebecca stayed with the boarding house friends as planned, while Lucas took a room at a nearby hotel. But before they parted for the night, he took her hand and kissed it gently. "Sleep well, Rebecca. Tomorrow we will start back, and then I will begin properly courting you." "I look forward to it," Rebecca said with a smile that made her face ache. The ride back to the ranch the next day seemed to pass in a golden haze. Everything looked more beautiful, more vivid, more full of possibility than it had before. Rebecca and Lucas talked and laughed and planned for a future that suddenly seemed within reach. He told her about his dreams of someday having his own small ranch, nothing huge, just enough land to run some cattle and build a good life. She told him about her love of learning and her desire to maybe teach someday, to help other young women discover that questions were not something to fear. "We could do both," Lucas suggested. "A small ranch with a schoolroom attached. You could teach the local children. I could work the land. We could build something good together." "That sounds wonderful," Rebecca said, her heart full to bursting with hope and happiness. When they arrived back at Copper Creek Ranch, Lucas helped Rebecca unload the wagon, then asked to speak with Mr. Henderson privately. Rebecca went inside to find Mrs. Henderson in the kitchen, and the older woman took one look at her face and smiled knowingly. "So," she said dryly, "I take it the trip to Lordsburg was productive in more ways than one." Rebecca felt her face heat. "Is it that obvious? My dear girl, you are practically glowing, and Lucas has been looking at you like you hung the moon for weeks now. It was only a matter of time." "Do you think it is too soon?" Rebecca asked anxiously. "It has only been 6 weeks since I came here." "Life does not move according to some predetermined schedule," Mrs. Henderson said wisely. "When you meet someone who makes you happy, who respects you and values you, who you can truly be yourself with, you do not let that go just because the timing seems unconventional. My husband proposed to me 3 weeks after we met, and we have been happily married for 28 years. Rebecca felt reassured by the older woman's words. "Lucas said he wanted to court me properly. He is speaking to Mr. Henderson now." "Then I imagine my husband will give his blessing," Mrs. Henderson said. "He likes Lucas, respects his work ethic and character, and he has seen how good you two are together." Sure enough, when the men emerged from Mr. Henderson's office a short while later, both were smiling. Lucas sought Rebecca out immediately. "Mr. Henderson has given his blessing," he said, his eyes shining with happiness. "I can officially court you with all the respectability and propriety that entails. Over the following weeks, Lucas was true to his word. He courted Rebecca with a steadiness and attention that made her feel cherished in a way she had never experienced before. He brought her wildflowers from the desert, their blooms bright against the brown landscape. He took her riding in the cooler mornings, showing her the beautiful places on the ranch, the hidden springs and dramatic rock formations. He sat with her in the evenings after work, talking about everything and nothing, their conversations ranging from the philosophical to the wonderfully mundane. More than that, he continued to welcome and encourage her questions about everything. When she wondered about something, he helped her explore it, offering his own thoughts, but never insisting he had all the answers. When she expressed doubts or concerns, he listened without judgment, helping her work through her feelings without trying to tell her what to think. "You know what I love about you?" Rebecca said one evening as they sat together on the porch, watching another spectacular desert sunset. "What?" Lucas asked, his arm around her shoulders. "You treat my mind like it is just as important as my heart. Most men just want a woman to look pretty and obey. But you actually care what I think, what I wonder about, what ideas I have. You make me feel like my thoughts matter." "They do matter," Lucas said earnestly. "Your mind is brilliant, Rebecca. The way you think through problems, the questions you ask, the insights you have, all of it fascinates me. I could listen to you think out loud for hours and never get bored." "That is exactly what I mean," Rebecca said, kissing his cheek. "You are extraordinary, Lucas Brennan." "No more than you are," he replied, pulling her closer. As summer turned to fall and the brutal heat began to ease slightly, Lucas started talking more seriously about the future. He had been saving his wages for years, living frugally and putting away every spare dollar. He was nearly ready to buy his own land, to start building the dream he had carried since coming west. "I have been looking at a parcel about 20 miles south of here," he told Rebecca one October morning as they rode out to check on some cattle. "It is not huge, only about 300 acres, but it has good water and decent grazing. There is a small house on it already, needs some work, but it is sound. I could afford it with what I have saved, and still have enough left over to stock it with some cattle to start." "That sounds perfect," Rebecca said, her heart beating faster at the implication of his words. Lucas pulled his horse to a stop and turned to look at her seriously. "Rebecca, I know we have only been courting for a few months. I know by conventional standards that is not long enough, but I also know my own mind, and I know my own heart. I love you. I love everything about you, your intelligence and your courage and your kindness, and the way you challenge me to think deeper about everything. I want to build a life with you. I want to buy that land and make it into a home for both of us. So I am asking, and you can take all the time you need to answer, but would you consider marrying me?" Rebecca felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, Lucas, I will marry you. I love you too, more than I ever thought possible. You have given me so much. Safety and friendship and respect and love. You have shown me what it means to truly be valued for who I am. I want nothing more than to build a life with you." Lucas let out a whoop of joy and swung down from his horse, then lifted Rebecca down from hers and spun her around, both of them laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, pouring all his love and happiness into the embrace. "We should tell the Hendersons as soon as we get back," Lucas said when they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless. "And then I will go into Lordsburg tomorrow and buy you a proper ring, and we can start planning the wedding." "I do not need a fancy ring," Rebecca protested. "But I want to give you one anyway," Lucas said firmly. "You deserve beautiful things, Rebecca. You deserve to be celebrated and honored, and I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you know how precious you are." The Hendersons were delighted by the news, as Rebecca had known they would be. Mrs. Henderson immediately began planning, discussing dates and arrangements and all the details that went into a wedding. "We will have it here at the ranch," she declared. "A proper celebration with food and music and dancing. We will invite everyone from Lordsburg and the surrounding ranches. It will be beautiful." "What about people from Stein's Pass?" Rebecca asked quietly. "Should we invite them?" Mrs. Henderson looked at her seriously. "Do you want them there?" Rebecca thought about it. "No," she finally said. "No, I do not think I do. They made their choice when they cast me out. I do not need their approval or their presence to make my happiness complete." "Then we will not invite them," Mrs. Henderson said firmly. "This day is about you and Lucas, about celebrating your love and your future. Anyone who could not see your worth does not deserve to be part of that celebration." Lucas went to Lordsburg the next day and returned with a simple gold band set with a small but beautiful sapphire. "It reminded me of the sky at twilight," he explained as he slipped it onto Rebecca's finger. "That moment when everything seems full of possibility." "It is perfect," Rebecca said, admiring how the blue stone caught the light. "Just like you." They set the wedding date for late November, giving themselves time to make arrangements and for Lucas to finalize the purchase of his land. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparation and excitement. Rebecca sewed herself a wedding dress with help from Mrs. Henderson, a simple but elegant gown in cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Lucas spent his spare time working on the house on their new property, repairing the roof and floors, making sure everything was sound and ready for them to move into after the wedding. "It is not fancy," he warned Rebecca when he took her to see it. "Just 3 rooms and a porch. But it is solid, and we can add on to it as our family grows." Rebecca looked at the small adobe house, sitting in a valley between gentle hills, with a creek running nearby and cottonwood trees providing shade. She could see the potential in it, could imagine the life they would build there together. "It is perfect," she said sincerely. "It is ours. That makes it more beautiful than any mansion." As the wedding day approached, Rebecca found herself thinking about her parents and the family she had lost. Part of her still hurt from their rejection, still wished things had been different, but a larger part of her felt grateful, because their rejection had freed her to find this new life, this better life, where she was valued for who she truly was, rather than how well she conformed. 2 days before the wedding, Rebecca was in the kitchen helping Mrs. Henderson with preparations when one of the ranch hands came to the door. "There is someone here to see Miss Zimmerman," he said, looking uncomfortable. "Woman from Stein's Pass. She is waiting by the front gate." Rebecca's heart lurched. Did she give her name? "Said she was your mother." Rebecca looked at Mrs. Henderson, who squeezed her hand supportively. "Do you want to see her?" "I think I need to," Rebecca said slowly. "But will you come with me?" "Of course." They walked to the front gate together, and there stood Martha Zimmerman, looking older and more careworn than Rebecca remembered. Her mother's face lit up when she saw Rebecca, but there was uncertainty in her eyes as well. "Mama," Rebecca said, her voice carefully neutral. "Rebecca, thank you for seeing me. I was not sure you would." "I almost did not," Rebecca admitted. "What do you want?" Martha twisted her hands together nervously. "I heard you are getting married. The news traveled to Stein's Pass. I wanted to see you before the wedding, to talk to you." "You had months to talk to me," Rebecca said, old hurt rising up. "You chose not to. You turned me away when I needed you most." "I know," Martha said, and tears spilled down her cheeks. "I know, and I am so sorry. I have been sorry every day since. I was wrong, Rebecca. So wrong. I let fear and what other people might think matter more than my own daughter. I told myself I was doing it for your own good, that you needed to learn the consequences of questioning faith. But the truth is, I was a coward. I was afraid of being cast out myself, of losing my place in the community. So I sacrificed you to protect myself. And I will regret that for the rest of my life. Rebecca felt her own tears starting. You hurt me so much, Mama. You made me feel like I was wrong for wanting to understand, for asking questions. You made me feel like I was not good enough. You were always good enough, Martha said fiercely. More than good enough. You are smart and brave and kind, and you deserved a mother who celebrated that instead of punishing you for it. I do not expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know that I was wrong and you were right. Your question was not heretical. It was thoughtful and important, and Elder Daniels was wrong to condemn you for it. What changed your mind? Rebecca asked. Martha looked down at her hands. Your father died 3 weeks ago. Heart gave out suddenly. And in those moments watching him die, I realized how short life is, how quickly we can lose the people we love. And I thought about how I threw you away over something that did not matter and how I might die without ever seeing you again, without ever telling you I was sorry. I could not bear that thought. I am sorry about Papa, Rebecca said, and she found she meant it despite everything. I know you loved him. I did, but I should have loved you more. I should have chosen you. Martha wiped at her tears. I am not asking you to come back to Stein's Pass or to pretend everything is fine between us. I know I do not deserve that, but I wanted you to know the truth. You did nothing wrong. You are a good person, and any mother would be lucky to have you as a daughter. I just wish I had been strong enough to see that when it mattered. Rebecca looked at her mother, at the genuine remorse in her face, and felt something shift inside her. The anger and hurt were still there, but they were no longer all-consuming. She could choose what to do with them, how to move forward. Thank you for coming here, she said finally. Thank you for saying that. I do not know if I can forgive you right now. The hurt is still too fresh, but I appreciate you acknowledging that you were wrong. That is more than I deserve, Martha said softly. I hope you will be very happy with your young man. I hope he treats you the way you deserve to be treated. He does, Rebecca said with certainty. He values my questions. He encourages me to think and learn and grow. He makes me feel like I am exactly who I am supposed to be. Then he is a good man, Martha said. That is all I could wish for you. She hesitated, then added, Would it be all right if I attended your wedding? I understand if the answer is no, but I would very much like to see you married, if you will allow it. Rebecca thought about it carefully. Part of her wanted to say no, to exclude her mother the way she had been excluded. But that felt like perpetuating the cycle of punishment and rejection, and she did not want to carry that forward into her new life. You can come, she said slowly. But you should know that I am not coming back to Stein's Pass. Not now, and probably not ever. The life I am building with Lucas is here, with people who accept me as I am. This is my home now. I understand, Martha said, and I am glad you found a place where you belong. She reached out tentatively, and after a moment's hesitation, Rebecca took her hand and squeezed it briefly before letting go. After her mother left to make the journey back to Stein's Pass, Rebecca sat on the porch with Mrs. Henderson, processing everything that had happened. How do you feel? The older woman asked gently. Confused, Rebecca admitted. Part of me is glad she came, glad she apologized. But part of me is still angry that it took my father dying for her to see how wrong she was, and I do not know if I will ever be able to trust her again. That is understandable, Mrs. Henderson said. Forgiveness is not something that happens all at once. It is a process, and you are allowed to take as much time as you need with it. You are also allowed to forgive her without letting her back into your life the way she was before. Boundaries are important, and you get to decide what yours are. Did you ever have to forgive someone for something big? Rebecca asked. Mrs. Henderson was quiet for a moment. My father, the minister I told you about, was a good man in many ways, but he also had very clear ideas about what women should and should not do. When I told him I wanted to come west with my husband, Instead of staying near home where he could watch over us, he was furious. He said I was being disobedient and foolish, that I would regret choosing my husband over my family. We did not speak for 3 years after that. Eventually, he reached out and apologized, said he had been wrong to try to control my choices. I forgave him and we had a good relationship until he died. But it took time, and there were always certain topics we had to avoid because the hurt ran too deep. Do you think I am doing the right thing, letting her come to the wedding? Rebecca asked. I think you are doing what feels right to you, and that is all anyone can do. Mrs. Henderson said, you are not responsible for fixing your mother's guilt or making her feel better about what she did. You are only responsible for your own heart and your own healing. If having her at the wedding feels right, then it is right. If you change your mind tomorrow, that is all right too. Rebecca found Lucas that evening and told him about her mother's visit. He listened carefully, then pulled her into his arms. What do you need from me? He asked simply. Just this, Rebecca said, resting her head against his chest. Just you being here, being steady, reminding me that I am loved. That I can do, Lucas promised. Today and every day for the rest of our lives. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, with the crisp coolness of late November replacing the summer heat. Mrs. Henderson and several women from neighboring ranches had transformed the area around the main house into a festive space, with tables laden with food, benches for seating, and wildflowers decorating every available surface. Rebecca dressed in her new gown with Mrs. Henderson's help, her hands shaking slightly with a mixture of nerves and excitement. The older woman pinned Rebecca's dark hair up and wove small white flowers through it. You look beautiful, Mrs. Henderson said warmly. Lucas is a very lucky man. I am the lucky one, Rebecca said sincerely. Thank you for everything you have done for me. You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. You treated me with kindness and respect when my own family would not. I will never forget that. You earned every bit of it by being the remarkable young woman you are, Mrs. Henderson replied. Now, let us get you married. The ceremony was held outside, with a justice of the peace from Lordsburg officiating, since neither Rebecca nor Lucas wanted anything to do with Elder Daniels or his church. About 40 people had gathered, ranch families from the surrounding area, townspeople from Lordsburg who knew and respected the Hendersons, and yes, Martha Zimmerman sitting quietly in the back row. But Rebecca had eyes only for Lucas as she walked toward him across the dusty ground. He stood tall and handsome in his best clothes, his face alight with love and joy as he watched her approach. When she reached him, he took her hands in his and squeezed gently. You are so beautiful, he whispered. So are you, she whispered back, making him grin. The justice of the peace spoke about the sanctity of marriage, about partnership and respect, and building a life together. Then he asked them to speak their vows. Rebecca, Lucas said, his voice clear and strong, I promise to honor you and respect you all the days of my life. I promise to welcome your questions and cherish your brilliant mind. I promise to be your partner in all things, to share in your joys and support you through your sorrows. I promise to build a home with you where we can both be fully ourselves, where curiosity is celebrated and growth is encouraged. I love you more than I have words to express, and I am honored to become your husband. Rebecca felt tears streaming down her face, but she smiled through them. Lucas, I promise to stand beside you as we build our life together. I promise to be honest with you always, to share my thoughts and feelings even when they are difficult. I promise to support your dreams and celebrate your successes. I promise to love you not just for who you are now, but for who you will become as we grow together. You have shown me what it means to be truly valued, truly seen, truly loved. I am so grateful I found you that night by the water tower, and I am grateful every day since. I love you, and I will love you for the rest of my life. The justice of the peace pronounced them husband and wife, and Lucas pulled Rebecca into a kiss that drew cheers and applause from the gathered crowd. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying, Rebecca felt like her heart might burst from happiness. The celebration that followed was joyful and lively. There was music and dancing, more food than they could possibly eat, and toasts from friends wishing them well. Mr. Henderson made a speech about how Lucas was one of the finest men he had ever known, and how Rebecca had become like a daughter to them. Several of the ranch wives pulled Rebecca aside to welcome her into the community of women who understood the challenges and rewards of ranch life. Later in the evening, Martha approached Rebecca tentatively. "That was a beautiful ceremony," she said softly. "I am very happy for you." "Thank you," Rebecca said. "Thank you for coming." "I know I do not have the right to say this," Martha began, "but I hope that maybe, someday, when enough time has passed, we might be able to rebuild some kind of relationship. Not the way it was before, I know that is not possible, but something new, something honest." Rebecca looked at her mother, at the hope and regret in her eyes, and felt compassion stir alongside the hurt. "Maybe," she said carefully. "I am not ready yet, but maybe someday. For now, I need to focus on my new life with Lucas. But I am glad you came today. It meant something that you were here." Martha nodded, fresh tears in her eyes. "That is enough. That is more than enough. Be happy, Rebecca. That is all I want for you now." As the sun set and the celebration continued, Lucas pulled Rebecca aside. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Brennan?" Rebecca felt a thrill at hearing her new name. "More than ready, Mr. Brennan." They said their goodbyes to the Hendersons and the other guests, accepting hugs and congratulations and well wishes. Then Lucas helped Rebecca into the wagon he had prepared, their belongings already packed, and they set off for their new home under a sky full of stars. The little house looked welcoming in the moonlight as they approached. Lucas had left a lamp burning in the window, and smoke curled from the chimney where he had laid a fire earlier in the day. He helped Rebecca down from the wagon, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "I believe there is a tradition about carrying the bride over the threshold," he said with a grin. "I believe you are right," Rebecca said, laughing as he carried her through the door. Inside, the house was warm and cozy. Lucas had spent weeks making sure everything was ready. The bed made with new linens, supplies stocked in the kitchen, wood stacked by the fireplace. It was small and simple, but it was theirs, a fresh start built on love and mutual respect. "Welcome home," Lucas said softly, setting Rebecca down gently. "Home," Rebecca repeated, savoring the word. "Yes, this is home." That night, as they lay together in their new bed, Rebecca marveled at how much her life had changed in just 6 months. She had gone from a frightened, rejected young woman with no future to a married woman with a home, a partner who loved her, and possibilities stretching endlessly ahead. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, running his fingers through her hair. "We're about how asking one question changed everything," Rebecca said. "If I had stayed quiet, stayed obedient, I would still be in Stein's Pass, slowly suffocating under the weight of all the things I was not allowed to think or say or wonder about. But I asked, and it led me here, to you, to this life." "I am glad you asked," Lucas said, kissing her forehead. "I am glad you had the courage to question, even knowing it might cost you everything. That bravery is one of the many things I love about you." "What do you think our life will look like?" Rebecca asked. 5 years from now, 10 years from now. "I think we will make this ranch successful," Lucas said thoughtfully. "Not huge, but sustainable and profitable. I think you will start your school, teaching children from the surrounding ranches, and maybe from town. I think we will have children of our own, and we will teach them to ask questions about everything, to think critically, to never accept something just because someone in authority says it is true. I think we will build a life based on mutual respect and love and the freedom to be ourselves. What do you think?" "I think that sounds perfect," Rebecca said, snuggling closer to him. Absolutely perfect. The first year of marriage brought its share of challenges, as first years often do. The ranch required constant work, and there were moments when the difficulties felt overwhelming. A dry spell in the spring threatened their water supply. They lost several head of cattle to disease. The house needed more repairs than they had initially realized. Money was tight, and there were times when Rebecca worried they had taken on more than they could handle. But through it all, they had each other. When Lucas was discouraged, Rebecca reminded him of how far they had come and how capable he was. When Rebecca felt overwhelmed by the isolation and hard work, Lucas reminded her that they were building something worthwhile, something that was truly theirs. They talked through every problem, every concern, working together to find solutions rather than letting difficulties drive them apart. Rebecca started teaching in the spring of their first year, beginning with just 3 children from a neighboring ranch. She held classes in their small front room 2 days a week, teaching reading and writing and arithmetic. But she also encouraged questions, rewarded curiosity, and helped the children develop critical thinking skills. Word spread, and by fall, she had 8 students and was holding classes 4 days a week. "I am so proud of you," Lucas told her as he watched her work with the children one afternoon. "You are making a real difference in these young lives." "It feels good," Rebecca admitted. "It feels like I am doing something important, something that matters." Their second year brought more stability and success. The rains came when they needed them, the cattle herd grew, and Lucas's careful management began paying off financially. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, able to meet their needs with a bit left over to save. More importantly, they were happy. They had built a life based on partnership and mutual respect, where both of them contributed equally to their success and both of them were valued for who they were. They continued to have long conversations about everything under the sun, their minds never tiring of exploring ideas and questions together. In the spring of their third year, Rebecca realized she was pregnant. She told Lucas one evening after dinner, and his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He whooped with joy, picked her up and spun her around gently, then immediately became worried about her health and comfort. "I am fine," Rebecca assured him, laughing. "Women have babies all the time. I am strong and healthy, and we will be fine." "I know," Lucas said, "but I cannot help worrying. You are the most precious thing in my life. The thought of anything happening to you terrifies me." "Nothing is going to happen to me," Rebecca said firmly. "We will get through this together, just like we get through everything." Their son was born in December of 1884, during a cold snap that frosted the windows and made the fire in the hearth essential. The birth was long and difficult, but Rebecca came through it well, and when the midwife placed the squalling baby in her arms, she felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. "Look at him," she whispered to Lucas, who sat beside her on the bed, tears streaming down his face. "Look at our son. He is perfect," Lucas said in wonder. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" They named him James after Lucas's father, and he was a bright, curious baby who seemed to inherit the best of both his parents. As he grew, he asked endless questions about everything he encountered, and Rebecca and Lucas delighted in encouraging his curiosity. "Why's the sky blue?" 3-year-old James asked one morning. Instead of dismissing the question or giving a simple answer, Lucas and Rebecca sat with him and talked about light and how it moves through the air, using terms he could understand. They did not have all the answers, but they showed him that asking questions was wonderful, that seeking to understand the world was something to be celebrated. Over the years that followed, Rebecca and Lucas had 2 more children, a daughter they named Clara in 1887 and another son, Thomas, in 1890. Each child brought their own personality and gifts, and each was encouraged to think independently and question freely. The school grew too. By 1890, Rebecca had 15 regular students and was teaching 5 days a week in a small building Lucas had helped build specifically for that purpose. She taught not just the basics of reading and writing, but also science and history and philosophy. She encouraged debate and discussion, rewarded original thinking, and helped shape a generation of children who were not afraid to ask questions. Martha Zimmerman came to visit occasionally over the years. The relationship between Rebecca and her mother never returned to what it had been before the casting out, but they found a new equilibrium, a cautious friendship built on honesty rather than obligation. Martha met her grandchildren and marveled at how Rebecca and Lucas were raising them. "They are so confident," she said during one visit, watching James argue a point with his father at the dinner table. "So sure of themselves." "They are raised to know that their thoughts and opinions matter," Rebecca explained, "that they do not have to apologize for thinking or questioning. It makes a difference." "I can see that," Martha said quietly. "I wish I had raised you that way. I wish I'd been brave enough to let you be fully yourself." "You are here now," Rebecca said, and she meant it. The anger and hurt had faded over the years, replaced by understanding and a measure of compassion. Her mother had been a product of her own upbringing and fears, just as Rebecca was now shaping her children through her own choices and values. That is what matters. One evening in 1891, as Rebecca and Lucas sat on their porch watching the sunset, celebrating their 10th wedding anniversary, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought them there. "Do you ever think about that night at the water tower?" she asked. "When you found me sitting there, crying and alone?" "Sometimes," Lucas admitted. "I think about how close I came to riding past, to deciding it was not my business. What would have happened to you if I had?" "I do not know," Rebecca said honestly. "I probably would have survived somehow, but I would not have this life. I would not have you or our children or this home we have built. So I am very glad you stopped." "So am I," Lucas said, pulling her close. "Stopping that night was the best decision I ever made. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Rebecca. You and our family, this life we have built together. I love you more today than I did on our wedding day, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." "That is exactly how I feel," Rebecca said, resting her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Lucas. Thank you for welcoming my questions about everything." "Thank you for asking them," Lucas replied. "Our life is richer because you never stopped wondering, never stopped seeking to understand." As the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, Rebecca felt a deep sense of peace and contentment. She had been cast out for asking questions about faith, for refusing to accept easy answers to complex problems. That casting out had felt like the end of her world at the time, like a punishment she did not deserve. But it had actually been a beginning of real freedom, of genuine partnership, of a life lived authentically rather than in fear. She had found in Lucas Brennan a man who welcomed questions about everything, who valued her mind as much as her heart, who had helped her build a life beyond anything she could have imagined in her strictest days in Stein's Pass. Their children were growing up strong and curious, unafraid to think for themselves. Their ranch was thriving. Rebecca's school was making a real difference in the community. And through it all, she and Lucas remained deeply in love, partners in every sense of the word. Sometimes the hardest moments in life, the moments that feel like destruction, are actually clearing space for something better to grow. Rebecca had been cast out, rejected, told she was wrong for questioning. But in being cast out, she had found her true home, her true partner, her true self. As Lucas took her hand and they sat together in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the life they had built together, Rebecca knew with absolute certainty that she would not change a single thing about her journey. Every hardship, every moment of doubt and fear had led her to this moment, this life, this love. And that was worth everything. Years continued to pass at the little ranch that grew steadily more prosperous. By 1895, Lucas had expanded their herd and added horses to their operation, breeding quality animals that were sought after by ranchers throughout the territory. Rebecca's school now had 22 students and a waiting list, with 2 assistant teachers helping her manage the growing enrollment. Their children were thriving, James at 11 was already showing an aptitude for ranching and working alongside his father. Clara at 8 had her mother's love of learning and spent every spare moment with her nose in a book. And Thomas at 5 was the family entertainer, always making everyone laugh with his antics and observations. The house had grown too, with Lucas adding 2 more rooms and a larger kitchen to accommodate their expanding family. What had started as a simple 3-room structure was now a comfortable home, filled with laughter, books, and the warmth of genuine love. One day in late spring, a letter arrived from Lordsburg. It was from a regional education board, requesting that Rebecca consider a position as a traveling supervisor for schools throughout southern New Mexico. They had heard about her innovative teaching methods and wanted her to help train other teachers in encouraging critical thinking and student engagement. "This is quite an honor," Lucas said as they discussed the offer that evening. "They clearly recognize the excellent work you have been doing." "But it would mean traveling," Rebecca said thoughtfully. "Being away from home for weeks at a time. I do not know if I want to do that." "What do you want?" Lucas asked, always his first question. "Not what you think you should want, but what would actually make you happy." Rebecca considered carefully. "I love teaching. I love seeing children's minds open up, watching them discover that thinking is exciting and questions are valuable. But I also love being here, being with you and our children, being part of their daily lives. I do not want to miss James learning to break horses, or Clara's next school recitation, or Thomas figuring out how to read. Those moments are precious and they do not come again." "Then decline the offer," Lucas said simply. "You are doing important work right here. You do not need to travel the territory to make a difference. Every child you teach goes out into the world carrying what you have given them, the courage to think, to question, to seek understanding. That influence spreads in ways we may never fully see." Rebecca smiled at her husband, this man who had never once tried to tell her what to do, who always trusted her to know her own mind and make her own choices. "You are right. I will decline. Our life is here." She wrote a polite letter declining the position, but offering to write articles about her teaching methods for the education board to distribute. They accepted enthusiastically, and over the following years, Rebecca's ideas about education spread throughout the territory, influencing teachers in schools she would never personally visit. In 1898, Martha Zimmerman passed away peacefully in her sleep. Rebecca traveled to Stein's Pass for the funeral, bringing Lucas and the children with her. It was the first time she had been back since being cast out 17 years earlier, and she felt strange walking through the familiar streets. Elder Daniels was long gone, replaced by a younger minister who seemed less rigid in his views. Several people who had shunned Rebecca approached her after the funeral, awkwardly expressing their condolences and admiration for what she had made of her life. "We were wrong," Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house said quietly. "I have thought about that day many times over the years, about how we all turned our backs on you. You did not deserve that. You were always a good girl, and asking questions should never have been treated as a sin." Rebecca accepted the apologies graciously, but without pretense that everything was now fine. "Thank you for saying that. I hope the community here has learned to be more accepting of different ways of thinking." "It has," the young minister assured her. "We encourage questions now. We believe that faith that cannot withstand questioning is not truly faith at all." "You were ahead of your time, Mrs. Brennan." "Or perhaps the community was behind," Rebecca said gently but firmly. "Either way, I am glad things have changed." She buried her mother beside her father, said goodbye to the town that had once been her whole world, and returned to her real home with Lucas and their children. She felt sad about her mother's death, but also at peace. They had reconciled as much as was possible, found a cautious friendship in their later years. That was enough. As the new century approached, Rebecca and Lucas found themselves entering middle age with grace and gratitude. Their hair was graying, their faces lined by sun and wind and the passage of time, but they were still deeply in love, still best friends, as well as husband and wife. Do you ever regret it? Lucas asked one evening in 1899 as they sat on their porch, a ritual they had maintained throughout their marriage. Asking that question all those years ago, everything that followed. Never, Rebecca said without hesitation. Not for a single moment. Yes, it was painful at the time. Yes, I lost things I thought were essential. But I gained so much more. I gained freedom to think, freedom to be myself, freedom to love and be loved for who I truly am. I gained you, our children, this life. How could I possibly regret that? I am glad, Lucas said, taking her hand, because I thank God every day that you asked that question, that you were brave enough to think for yourself. Otherwise, we might never have found each other. We were meant to find each other, Rebecca said with certainty. One way or another, we would have. Because you welcome questions about everything, and I cannot stop asking them. We were inevitable. Lucas laughed and pulled her close. I like that. We were inevitable. Their children grew and eventually started lives of their own. James took over more and more of the ranch operations as Lucas aged, showing the same dedication and skill his father had. Clara became a teacher herself, inspired by her mother's example, and opened a school in Lordsburg that became known for its progressive methods. Thomas surprised them all by showing a gift for veterinary medicine, studying with a doctor in El Paso, and returning to serve the ranching community. All three children married and started families of their own, and Rebecca and Lucas found themselves grandparents to a growing brood of curious, questioning grandchildren who were raised with the same values their parents had learned. Think for yourself, ask questions, never accept easy answers to complex problems, and value truth over comfort. In 1910, when Rebecca was 51 and Lucas 54, they sat on their porch on their 29th wedding anniversary, watching their various children and grandchildren playing in the yard. Look at what we built, Lucas said softly. Not just the ranch or the school, but this family. All these people who know how to think for themselves, who are not afraid to question, who value understanding over blind obedience. That is our real legacy. It is, Rebecca agreed. And it all started because you stopped one night when you saw someone in trouble. You welcomed my questions when everyone else condemned them. You showed me what real love looks like. Not control, not demands for conformity, but genuine acceptance and respect. You showed me the same things, Lucas said. You taught me that loving someone means celebrating their mind as well as their heart. That partnership means two equals building something together. That the best life is one lived authentically rather than according to someone else's script. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, the same sky they had watched together countless times over the years. If you could go back, Lucas finally said, back to that day in the church when you asked your question, knowing everything that would follow, would you still ask it? Rebecca did not even need to think about it. Absolutely, without question, because asking that question, refusing to accept easy answers, being cast out for wanting to understand, all of that led me here. To you, to our family, to this life. I would go through it all again, every painful moment, because this is where it brought me, and I would not trade this for anything in the world. Neither would I, Lucas said, kissing her gently. Neither would I. As darkness fell and stars began to appear, their family gradually drifted inside, calling goodnight, heading home, or to the guest rooms Lucas had added to accommodate visitors. Eventually, Rebecca and Lucas were alone on the porch, as they had been so many evenings throughout their marriage. I love you, Rebecca said, resting her head on Lucas's shoulder. More than I have words to express. Thank you for welcoming my questions. Thank you for building this life with me. I love you too, Lucas replied, holding her close. Thank you for having the courage to ask those questions in the first place. Thank you for being exactly who you are. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Rebecca Brennan, and loving you has been the greatest joy of my life. They sat together in the darkness, surrounded by the life they had built, secure in the knowledge that they had created something beautiful and lasting. Rebecca had been cast out for asking questions about faith, but in being cast out, she had found something far more valuable than the rigid certainty she had left behind. She had found freedom, love, partnership, and a life lived fully and authentically. The cowboy, who welcomed questions about everything, had given her the greatest gift of all, the space to be herself, to think freely, to love deeply, and to build a legacy that would outlive them both. Their children and grandchildren would carry forward the values they had embodied: curiosity, courage, critical thinking, and the certainty that questions were not threats to faith, but pathways to deeper understanding. And in the end, that was the most powerful answer of all. Not a definitive statement about theology or doctrine, but a lived example of what it meant to love authentically, think freely, and build a life based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. As Rebecca drifted off to sleep that night in the arms of her beloved husband, she thought once more about that terrible, wonderful day when everything changed. She had been 22 years old, frightened and rejected, sitting by a water tower with no idea what her future held. Now, nearly 30 years later, she knew her future had held everything: pain and healing, loss and finding, questions and the freedom to ask them, and above all, love. Deep, abiding, transformative love that had sustained her through every challenge and made every joy sweeter. She had asked a question about faith and been cast out, but in being cast out, she had found the truest faith of all: faith in herself, in her partner, in the power of love to transform and sustain, and in the absolute certainty that a life lived authentically, with courage to think and question and grow, was the most valuable life of all. That was her answer. That was her truth. And it was more than enough. It was everything.